Hello, welcome to our talk. In recent years, Lazarus has become a regular topic at not just Virus Bulletin, but many other security conferences. And we'd like to show you what's new and interesting around Lazarus recently. So the outline of our talk is as follows. We start with the story. There was an attack by Lazarus where the key subject of our talk was involved, and we describe when and where did the attack happen and which tools were involved. Next, we follow with demonstrations. You will understand in a while what we mean by that. And finally, we conclude our talk with key takeaways. So let's start with the story. Lazarus attacked an aerospace company in the Netherlands in October 2021 with a new rootkit involved. And the attack started as usual. An employee of the company was contacted by the attackers through LinkedIn messaging and got a dream job offer. So the communication continued. In email, he received a malicious email with attachment, an Amazon-themed document. And after opening this document, the victim compromised its endpoint. Afterwards, the Lazarus attackers, started to deploy their tools. As we used from the past, they used multi-stage chains to deploy their payloads, starting with droppers and intermediate loaders, in order to avoid detection. And the final payloads that were loaded, in this case, were this one. Blinding Can, the flagship remote access tool used by Lazarus. Next, HTTPS Uploader, a custom tool, a custom little tool that is able to leak sensitive data in high volumes from victim's computer. And finally, some generic HTTPS downloader that is able to bring additional tools onto the victim's system. Today, we are releasing a blog post that describes all the technical details about these tools, about attribution, and links to other Lazarus campaigns. But at this talk, we would like to focus on something else. Let me introduce to you FUD module. It's a dynamically linked DLL of roughly 88 kilobytes. It's not that big, but to be honest, it was all new for us, and we spent weeks, even months, analyzing these 88 kilobytes of code and data. And the process where we identified this DLL was msi.exec.exe of unknown integrity, but definitely administrator rights are required for proper functioning of FUD module. And it has one export, close. Interestingly, it contains an embedded, legitimate sign driver by Dell. And unfortunately, this driver contains a vulnerability. The vulnerability has assigned this CVE number. It's from 2021. And this is so-called bring your own vulnerable driver technique. And we refer to it in the title of our talk. And exploiting this vulnerability, FUD module becomes a user mode module that is able to modify arbitrary kernel memory. And why does FUD module want to do that? In order to turn off Windows system monitoring. And this is why we add to the title, Evil to the Windows Core. The installation of FUD module is as follows. Initially, it drops the vulnerable driver into the corresponding folder. This is the operation that it requires administrator rights. Then it calls device IO control with a specific code that triggers the exploit and a specifically crafted buffer of 32 bytes, where one significant bit is flipped in the kernel memory. And what this bit represents, it represents the status of the thread where FAT modules is running. And after this change, Windows treats FAT module as running in the kernel space. Therefore, all calls of NT-write virtual memory from kernel space or to kernel space proceed successfully. And this is an overview of the close export. The initial lines are just the installation and setup of malware configuration. And highlighted in red are 7 procedures. And these procedures are related to various Windows concepts, mechanisms that are related to system monitoring. And in what follows, we try to demonstrate the functionality of these 7 calls. When we asked ourselves how to design our presentation, we considered these things. There are very low-level core variables involved, like kernel structures, pointers, variables behind these mechanisms. And by reversing FAT module, we learned the exact method how FAT module locates these structures and how it modifies them. And we put all these details into the paper. But in this presentation, we would like to show high-level perspective. We choose a software that leverages such mechanism, for example, process monitor or various sample drivers offered by Microsoft in order to let kernel developers learn various Windows concepts. Microsoft publishes openly a collection of sample drivers on their GitHub account. So we pick some of those examples and show how FAT module disables them, blinds them, like turns them off. So let's start with the first mechanism, registry callbacks. These are basically notifications provided by Windows to third-party drivers in case of events related to registry. And the numbering here, the hexadecimal 1, represents the position of this mechanism in a bit field that is returned to the attackers and represents the overall success of FAT module's execution. This is a screenshot of process monitor. Everything is filtered out except events related to registry event class. You can see this icon is turned on, all the other icons are turned off. Moreover, we restrict our attention only to regedit because not to have that noisy output. So only regedit is displayed here. And this is a normal activity recorded in process monitor. After running FAT module, everything disappears or nothing is recorded. The front picture just shows that the filter is correct. We are including regedit registry events, but nothing is displayed because registry callbacks were wiped by FAT module. Let's move to the second mechanism, object callbacks. There's a sample driver in that Microsoft's collection that is related to this concept. You are able to prevent a process from creation or termination. And we chose Notepad.exe to be prevented from termination. You can see that we have one instance of Notepad running. And when we try to kill it, we receive an error. Access is denied because the sample driver protects that process from the kernel. After running FAT module, this protection is over and we are able to kill Notepad easily. And we can imagine that this option of preventing process from being created or terminated is a feature that could be a regular part of a security solution. It's like security solutions prevent their uninstallation or killing those processes. So this is related to security solution products, or it could be very likely. Let's move to the next mechanism, process, thread, and image callbacks. Again, let's test that with process monitor. Like previously, all events are filtered out except process event class. Moreover, we restrict our attention only to notepad.exe, not to have too noisy output. And after running FAT module, what would you expect? Yes, no output there. And the front picture just shows that our filter is correct and includes notepad within process event class. And there is no output there, regardless of how hard we are trying to open and close instances of Notepad in the background. I forgot to say this in the previous example. We've got no output, regardless we were trying to open, create, modify, delete registry keys in regedit in the previous example. And now it's time for Matěj to deliver his part.
Hello everyone. My name is Matěj Havránek and I am a malware analyst at ESET Research. I have worked with Peter on researching this Lazarus campaign during the last year. Unfortunately, I am not able to attend this year's virus bulletin in person, so I hope you won't mind me presenting on video. After Peter's explanation of how the module disables callbacks, let's look at how the malware unhooks minifilters. Minifilters are a lightweight alternative to legacy file system drivers used to track file activity. They are very often used by EDR or anti-malware software to monitor what is going on in the file system. The FAT module accesses the minifilter information structures in memory and iterates over all registered minifilters, skipping whitelisted drivers. The whitelist consists of several Windows drivers which are crucial to system stability and need to have access to these monitoring features. For any other minifilters it discovers, it identifies their handler functions and modifies their prologues to make them immediately exit without processing any data. Modifying kernel-level code of other programs at runtime is a very risky operation that isn't often seen in the wild. There is a lot of assumption going into this, and unexpected changes in the OS configuration may lead to this method causing system instability. Here you can see the modification done to the scanner post create function of a file system monitoring driver that we used in our testing. On the left, there is the original function code. On the right, there is the patched version, which immediately returns 0 and exits. It also attempts to remove the post call hook for a number of IRP routines, such as create, write, or system control, further blocking access to information coming from the lowest levels of the OS. Instead of using real malware, we demonstrate this on the industry standard antivirus test file, the ICAR file, using Microsoft's file system scanner minifilter. The minifilter consists of a kernel mode driver intercepting file system operations and a user mode program doing the scanning. As we can see on the left side, when we attempt to access this file in a clean system, the scan user driver intercepts the file read request, inspects the file, identifies it as malicious, and blocks the access. The safe to open value is 0, meaning the file was deemed unsafe. After running the FAT module and repeating this action, we can observe the result on the right. The file opens normally, the safe to open value is 1, and the file is considered safe. The scan user driver did not report any file system activity to the user mode component, so it wasn't able to scan it. The next technique is disabling the Windows filtering platform callouts. The Windows filtering platform is an API that provides access to network communication on the packet level. It is used among others by network filtering applications such as firewalls, host intrusion prevention systems, and EDR products to inspect incoming and outgoing traffic and detect anomalies. Here on the left, you can see the contents of the callout structure. The malware iterates through all enabled filters and their callout structures and attempts to modify the flags field. We wanted to test if this modification would be able to disable a very simple firewall. We found a minimalistic TCP and UDP firewall. We customized it to block any traffic that contains the ICAR test file. And on top of the screen, we can see the filter in action, letting legitimate traffic through and blocking the ICAR test file. On the left side is the server, on the right side is the client. However, in our testing, this modification had no impact on the ability of Windows filtering platform drivers to access and inspect network activity. It seems that it requires some specific conditions that we weren't able to reproduce. It is possible that this method targets some specific EDR system or is still being developed, and what we've seen wasn't the final mechanism. The flag bit at 0x20 is used to disable Windows event tracing. Event tracing for Windows is a kernel-level tracing model that enables tracing and logging of both user mode and kernel mode events. It can deal with both real-time events and log files. On this screenshot, you can see how event handlers are registered with event providers. The FAD module enumerates all Windows event tracing providers, finds the handlers of registered callbacks, and replaces their addresses with zeros. This means that non-whitelisted applications lose access to event tracing callbacks and will not be notified of any new events. We weren't able to design a simple example that would demonstrate the role of event tracing in system monitoring. However, we strongly believe that there are EDRs and other monitoring tools that utilize this method as part of their functionality, and disabling it is beneficial for the malware authors. Last on the list are prefetch files. Prefetch files serve as a cache for file metadata, speeding up the load times for process creation. It is possible to register a so-called prefetch trace callback from a third-party program, which will provide access to prefetch data. There is a kernel variable called pfsn_num active traces that contains the number of active prefetch traces. An interesting fact is that even though this variable exists with this name in Microsoft's PDB files, it is not documented and there is nothing to be found about it on the internet. It seems that until now, nobody thought it was particularly important. There is also an undocumented and unnamed kernel variable containing the maximum number of active traces for tracing to still be performed, which we internally named traces threshold, as you can see here on line 16. As we can see in this image, if the number of currently active traces is bigger than this threshold, the tracing handler method of the OS will exit prematurely with the error value too many sessions, and the prefetch info will not be propagated. The malware sets the pfsn_num active traces value to 0xFFFFFF, which is a high enough value to disable any prefetch tracing by making the OS think that there are already too many active traces. We tested this method against Nearsoft's WinPrefetchView, which relies on prefetch tracing to provide us with information. In the first test, we ran it on a clean system, executed several programs such as Calculator or Notepad, and observed lots of prefetch logs. In the lower part, we can see the result of the same actions on a system with FAD module active. No prefetch data could be accessed. In addition to blocking some inspection tools, removal of prefetch data also makes any forensic analysis of infected machines much harder. As far as we are aware, this is a brand new technique that was not observed in the wild before, and we might see it used more often now that it is being publicized. This is all as far as the individual blinding techniques are concerned, and also all from me. Thank you all for your attention, and allow me to give the floor back to Peter.
Yeah, so let's continue with our talk. There was a talk at CritiCon 2019 where Christopher Vela was reversing and bypassing EDRs. And he said this on self-protection of EDRs. EDRs weren't compiled with as much focus around security as an anti-cheat driver. And he offered a comparison. On one hand, we have anti-cheat drivers with plenty of anti-malware and anti-debug techniques and virtualized code running. And even experienced reverse engineers struggle with the analysis. And on the other hand, he had these EDRs that he reversed. And there was no obfuscation, no anti-analysis, even debug prints explaining what's going on in the code. And the complexity of the anti-cheat drivers is obvious. There's a long-standing battle, a cat and mouse game between game hackers and anti-cheat developers. So the complexity is a natural consequence of such battle. It seems there's nothing similar in the world of EDRs and between EDRs developers and malware authors, up until now. And perhaps the simplicity of EDR drivers and the lack of self-protection was the main reason why Lazarus developers were able to develop FAT module. So let's move to the conclusion. Lazarus is capable of a complex process of research. Actually, they really did their homework. They were able to identify little documented features of Windows operating system and find out the mechanisms behind that were interesting for them to to disable Windows monitoring. Moreover, there is a wide range of Windows variants supported by FAT module, since Windows 7.1 up to the most recent variants of Windows. And we believe it was really time-consuming because the location of crucial kernel components, kernel data, changes from one version to another. So they really had to take a look on all variants of Windows. Capable of development, because FAT module is not a project that you can clone from a repository somewhere on the internet. It's built from scratch. And it involves techniques that very likely only experts in Windows internals could develop. And finally, testing. We didn't experience any problems during our analysis and debugging of FAT module. Moreover, when Lazarus finally gets foothold in the network of their interest, I believe they wouldn't risk to deploy an unstable tool and cause blue screen of death on the victim's machine. So from our perspective, Lazarus is really a sophisticated threat actor. Many live monitoring tools may have been affected and are affected. It's very likely that they are. EDRs, firewalls, HIPSIS, anti-malware. If you are a developer of such product, especially of kernel components, please take a look at what FAT module does and re-evaluate your implementation, and if necessary, increase self-protection. Moreover, a post-mortem digital forensics may be affected as well. We already know that Lazarus deletes their files from victims' computers securely when they are not needed anymore. Now, with the loss of Prefetch files and history of execution, this may lead to investigators of Lazarus incidents to a false impression that the attack was not as serious as it was in reality. And the very last point, FAT module is in active development. We see new versions where they updated these mechanisms. Even they add a new one. So now they have 8 independent mechanisms how to turn off Windows system monitoring. And we will keep an eye on this threat because we are really curious how this will evolve. And I guess this is the end of our presentation, and these are our contact details in case you have questions and so on. So.
Do we have any questions? There is a question, Shamir.
Really good talk, Peter. Now, the thing is that you mentioned that security companies, EDR providers, antivirus may have to look at the techniques being used and try to counter that. But the problem is that when sort of the bad guys are also in kernel and you're also in kernel, kind of all bets are kind of off, right? So you basically need to get in there before they get into kernel. So is there something that we can do as well as what Microsoft can do to make sure that the vulnerable driver, I mean, that itself has not been loaded? I mean, is there something that can be done?
Yes, thank you for the question. Yeah, obviously the best place where to stop the threat is not to let the bad guys to load their vulnerable driver and to get the ability to write kernel space. But I think there could be more mechanisms, and Microsoft is improving their kernel mechanisms, that they would just take a look at the crucial kernel structures. And yeah, there's some kernel blue screen of that exception that says that the critical structures were modified. So my suggestions would be to add to the list of critical structures also those involved like these to really check integrity of the callbacks if they are not wiped out, or somehow control the process, at least to make the life of the bad guys harder, because now it's really easy.
Hi, Peter. I'm over here.
Hello.
So you said that the original attack in which this was discovered was an email message that had an attachment. Have you seen any other vectors for installing this malware and being able to get hooked in on the operating system?
Actually, we have seen only 2 instances. That one in the Netherlands in October 2021, and the second in South Korea recently, like 2 months ago or 1 month ago. And we didn't identify the intrusion mechanism at that case. But Lazarus has multiple options how to intrude, how to infiltrate their victims. Obviously, the easiest one is to contact the target and let the target self-compromise themselves. But they also do exploitation. We believe they have also some zero-day capabilities. So, but it's very hard to prove, right? Because if you don't do incident response on the machine, the intrusion vector is really in question. So we don't know.
Last time when I checked that if you once have a vulnerable driver which is digitally signed, and even if the digital signature is revoked, you can still load it. Did you recheck for the last builds of Windows 10 and Windows 11 whether it's still possible to load it?
Yeah, it's a good point regarding mitigation. We didn't check, but of course it should be something that should work. So. Yeah, thanks. Thanks for pointing this out, but we didn't check.
We have time for one more question. If you don't have any more questions, please join me to congratulate on the nice paper.